This will be a much more chronological walkthrough of what choices I have made through my career, so to say. So I'll take you through, but just to start out to present myself, this is my education. I have a bachelor in molecular biology and a master in molecular nutrition and food technology, both from Aarhus University. On the top of that, I have a PhD in medicine from Aarhus University and Aarhus University Hospital. But more specifically, I was master student in the Department of Endocrinology and Internal Medicine at Aarhus University Hospital. And directly after that, I was hired as a research assistant in the same department, where I worked on larger intervention trial at different projects. After that, I was enrolled as a PhD student in the same department again. So totally I was there for 7 years. And after that, I had my first position in Arla in the Global Quality Department in Arla Foods Ingredients. And after that, and that is also my current position, I'm a nutrition research scientist in R&D in Arla Foods Ingredients. So how was the way to my first job? I have had a very structured and maybe too structured approach towards my first job. Because one of the first things I did when I was enrolled into my PhD at Aarhus University, it was to define some goals that I wanted to obtain throughout my PhD. It was both scientific goals, but it was also more career-like or related goals that I wanted to obtain. And one of these goals was that I wanted to have a job the day I handed in my dissertation. I have not defined the job, but my mission along the PhD course was also to find out which kind of job do I want. After 2 years in my PhD, I have had my first maternity leave, and I have had 1.5 year study abroad. And therefore I decided to apply for a mentor. AU Career Center have a mentor course where you can apply for a person in the industry or in the public sector. And I was allocated a guy in the public sector. And that was really nice because he was employed by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and therefore he had a very broad overview of company that could be related or potentially be my future company in the region where I was living. During this period, we have a lot of discussions where I imagined that I wanted to go. Before I started the mentor, I did not have any frames of where I wanted to go. But after this 8 months course, I had more defined frames of which kind of job I wanted to apply for, and also what the value in the job was important for me. During this 8-month period, I also attended a PhD course at Aarhus University that is much like the meeting that we have today. Then I had my second maternity leave during my PhD, and during this period I decided to start following job ads at Job Index and LinkedIn and just saved them. I saved them independently of geographic location. So I searched in Denmark all around and also in the Nordic countries to see if what was interesting to me. I identified jobs in primarily in the food industry due to my education, but it was both in the industry, but it was also in the public sector. It was teaching jobs, but it was also jobs in the ministries. But what was interesting to me was that there was no research jobs in these job ads that I have identified. And for me, it told me that I needed to do something else. I needed to challenge myself in a new way, and I needed to switch environment. I came back from my second maternity leave in January 2018, and there I had 6 months before I had to hand in my thesis. And therefore I decided now I'm actively seeking for a job. during these months, I prepared my first applications, and I also got 3 rejections. And therefore, I reflected on these rejections, and I needed to have someone to review my CV and my application. What could I do better to be invited for an interview? And therefore, I had a review of my CV of a career consultant in the AU Career Center. And it was very successful because just after a month, I signed my first contract with Arla Foods Ingredients in the Global Quality Department. I started in June 2018, and 2 weeks after I handed in my dissertation. And this was only possible because I decided in January, 6 months before I handed in my thesis, that I need to make my finish ready so I can say yes if the right job comes. Then I defended my PhD 3 months later. So now you may ask yourself, why go to research into a supply chain department and work with quality? It sounds very, very boring. But it wasn't, because I had the environmental change that I wanted and that I mentioned before. And I also had a lot more cross-functional collaborations, which I have done to a very small extent during my PhD, but now I could extend it to a much larger degree. I was also seeking for new challenges, and one of the goals that I wanted to obtain was to know more about business, and it was possible in Arla Foods Ingredients because it's a business-to-business company with a close collaboration with customers. And also this very close link between the commercial departments and the more R&D and supply chain departments. But when you challenge yourself in a way that I did here, I also realized what was important for me and what was I actually dedicated to. And after 10 months in this job position in the quality department, I also realized that I was missing research and I wanted to go back to research. And therefore, I had the possibility to apply for a position in the R&D organization. I applied in the ordinary way, and therefore I also was invited to an ordinary interview. And to this interview, I was, of course, credited for my 10 months in Arla Foods Ingredients, so the know-how of the company from the inside. But I was also credited for my courage and my willingness to challenge myself in the way that I have done. So in my current position, I am placed in Arla Foods, or I'm employed in Arla Foods Ingredients. It's a subsidiary of Arla Foods. It is an ingredient company, so we are producing dairy-based powders, for instance, whey powders that I have worked with in my PhD, but also lactose and other fractions of dairy. I am placed in R&D, and in R&D we are divided into these 3D departments along the innovation pipeline, and I'm in the very front of the innovation pipeline in this small group called Nutrition and Health. So what am I more exact doing? One of the most important things that I am doing is that I am making research for the first physiological response of new ingredients. So the new ingredients that we develop, we need to have the evidence of the physiological effect. I'm also heading up all activities that we are doing in the R&D within gastrointestinal tract and disease. So I do a lot of project management, both with internal collaborators and internal researchers, but also with external collaborators. And it's both large-scale projects and small-scale projects. And both nationally, but also with the partners abroad. Then I'm also representing Arla Foods Ingredients within projects where we just represent ourselves and our products is tested, so smaller scale. And also a point of contact in some of these projects that is funded by the fund Arla Foods for Health. And finally, you get a lot of project suggestions from external researchers having a good idea, so a lot of reviewing of project suggestions, both with regards to project designs and plan and budgets. One of the most frequent questions asked in an alumni questionnaire is, which competences are you missing from your education? And I have reflected a little on that, because my experience is that it is directly related to the position that you are placed in. So for instance, when I was employed in the supply chain organization, I was very surprised even though I know that I challenged myself by taking a position in the supply chain, the gap was so large between the competences needed and the competences that I had. But when I was employed in R&D, at day 1 I could start by solving tasks, and at day 3 I was standing in front of a project as a project manager for a project with a budget of 12 million kroner. So there is very, very large differences, and it's important to match the competences and the job position. But what was needed in the jobs that I have been through, of course, project management tool was important. But for me, it was also important to perform in a fast and a very dynamic workflow. There was an extensive mail flow without no email policy, an extensive meeting frequency, and also the ability to solve tasks with an extremely short deadline. And then finally, I had to count the hours used on specific projects because all project hours need to be solved, and I only have a limited time. Then, of course, communication, as I also did in my PhD, but to a larger extent to continue the workflow in the project, so much more stakeholder management. And then I have written the ability to zoom in, zoom out, and by that I mean that I need the ability to switch between being a specialist and being a generalist. Because when talking to researchers outside the organization, they are the specialists, and I am the generalist. And when I go into our organization, I need to knowledge share the knowledge that we have from the research project, and I have to be the specialist within the company. So I think that's an important ability to have. And then, of course, more than ever, I have used my basic scientific knowledge. That is so important. But what was I missing? I was missing tools for project budgeting and project economy. I don't think that I have learned so much about that. And finally, a more practical approach to, especially when I was in the supply chain, a practical approach to how do a quality assurance, what is quality assurance and how do a quality system work, but also more manufacturing and production tools like Lean and GMP. So that was my way until now, and yeah. Yes, feel free to ask questions.
Actually, we will wait 5 minutes with the questions. For what we would like you to do is just to sit at the table and talk to each other and define 2 or 3 questions for Anna and Anne, and then we will be able to also give the opportunity for the online attendees to come up with some questions. So please use 5 minutes with your colleagues at the table.